The sun was already dipping low over Manila, casting long shadows on the narrow streets as Miguel's voice drifted through the chaos. Barefoot and wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, the 12-year-old stood near a crowded jeepney stop, his father's old guitar slung over his shoulder. He sang not for applause but for survival, his rich, soulful tone rising above the blare of car horns and street vendors calling out prices for fried bananas and sticky rice. Each note carried the weight of unspoken stories, of nights going to bed hungry, of his mother's tired smile, of his promise to keep his little sister in school no matter what. People slowed as they passed, some tossing a few coins into the small tin at his feet, others simply staring, caught off guard by how such a fragile boy could produce a voice so full of depth and longing. Among the crowd, a tourist paused, lifting a phone to record. The man's eyes softened as he watched Miguel close his eyes and pour himself into the song, his small fingers strumming with precision learned not from a teacher, but from hours on the streets, mimicking songs he heard on a neighbor's old radio. Miguel wasn't thinking about who was listening, he was thinking about how many more pesos he needed to buy rice and powdered milk before the market closed. But when the song ended, a hush lingered before polite applause trickled in. The tourist approached, dropped a bill into the tin, and quietly said, "You have a gift the world needs to hear." Miguel smiled shyly, not knowing that this moment, this stranger, and this simple recording would travel far beyond the streets he called home, and change his life forever. 2 weeks later, Miguel was sitting cross-legged on the cool cement floor of his family's one-room home, carefully mending a broken guitar string with a bent paperclip, when a neighbor burst through the doorway, waving a crumpled envelope. "Miguel. It's for you," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Confused, he wiped his hands on his shorts and took the letter. The return address wasn't from anywhere in the Philippines, it was from Los Angeles, USA. Inside, on thick paper with gold lettering, was an invitation from an international talent competition, telling him they'd seen his video online and wanted him to audition in person. For a moment, Miguel just stared, his lips parting but no sound coming out. His mother covered her mouth, tears welling, while his little sister clapped her hands without even knowing why. The news spread like wildfire through their neighborhood. That night, the community gathered outside under strings of dim light bulbs, making plans. A tricycle driver offered to sell an old spare tire to raise funds. The local sari-sari store owner promised to collect loose change from customers. An elderly woman donated her late husband's wristwatch, saying it was time for Miguel to see the world. Piece by piece, peso by peso, they built the means for his journey. On the morning of his flight, the streets were lined with neighbors cheering him on, pressing good luck charms into his hands, dried sampaguita flowers, tiny wooden crosses, even a folded letter with the words, "Don't forget where you came from." Miguel boarded the plane with a small backpack, his father's guitar, and a heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He had never been beyond the islands of his home, but now he was headed to a place where his voice might truly be heard. Under the blinding stage lights, Miguel felt his knees tremble as he stepped into the vast silence of the auditorium. The crowd stretched farther than he'd ever seen. Rows upon rows of strangers, cameras, and judges with expectant eyes. His small hands gripped his father's guitar, the wood warm from the heat of his palms. For a heartbeat, the noise of his racing thoughts drowned out everything. What if his voice cracked? What if they didn't like him? But then he remembered his sister's smile the night before he left, her whisper, "Sing like you're singing to Papa." He took a deep breath, strummed the first chord, and began Hotel California. The opening was soft, almost shy, but with each line his voice grew steadier, richer, carrying decades of pain and beauty beyond his 12 years. The melody wrapped around the room like a story everyone knew but had forgotten how to feel. By the first chorus, the chatter in the crowd had vanished, people leaned forward, their faces caught between awe and disbelief. One judge's eyes glistened, another pressed a hand over her mouth. Miguel's voice soared in the final verse, his fingers dancing over the strings as if he had been born to play this song. When the last note hung in the air, there was no sound, just a heavy, breathless pause. Then the audience erupted, rising to their feet in thunderous applause. Miguel blinked against the lights, his chest heaving, still unsure if he had just lived a dream or a miracle. Somewhere in the haze, he caught sight of a camera's red light, knowing, without fully understanding why, that his life had just shifted in a way that could never be undone. The applause was still echoing when one of the judges, a woman with tear-streaked cheeks, suddenly stood and slammed her palm onto the golden buzzer. The sound was like a thunderclap, and in an instant, a rain of shimmering gold confetti burst from the ceiling, cascading over Miguel in slow motion. His eyes went wide, his mouth falling open as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. The crowd roared louder, their cheers almost shaking the floor. The judge's voice trembled as she spoke into her microphone. "Miguel, you didn't just sing. You told us your story. You gave us your heart." The other judges nodded, some wiping away tears, while the audience chanted his name. Miguel stood frozen for a moment, gripping his guitar as if it were the only thing keeping him from floating away. Then his knees buckled, and he dropped to the stage, laughing and crying all at once. He thought of the narrow streets back home, of the coins dropped into his tin, of his mother's weary smile, and now this, a room full of strangers treating him like he was someone who mattered. Gold clung to his hair, his shoulders, even the strings of his guitar, catching the light as he looked up in wonder. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment a poor boy from Manila, who had once sung just to survive, stood on a stage thousands of miles away and felt the whole world listening. Somewhere in the crowd, a familiar voice called out, "Sing it again, Miguel." And for the first time, he believed he could. Months later, Miguel stepped off a bus back in Manila, no longer the timid street singer who had left, but a young man with a future he could shape. The same neighbors who had sold their belongings to send him abroad now lined the streets again, but this time they were cheering for a champion. He didn't return with just prize money, he came home with a dream bigger than himself. Using his winnings, Miguel bought a modest house for his mother and sister, replacing the leaky roof and cracked walls with a home filled with laughter and music. But he didn't stop there. In a small rented space near the marketplace, he opened a free music school for underprivileged kids, filling it with donated guitars, keyboards, and drums. Children who once wandered the streets aimlessly now sat cross-legged, learning chords and melodies, their eyes wide with the same wonder he once felt. On the opening day, Miguel stood in front of them and said, "Your voice is your story, don't be afraid to sing it." As he spoke, he spotted a man leaning quietly at the back of the room, smiling, the tourist who had filmed him all those months ago. Their eyes met, and Miguel walked over, embracing him in a silent thank you. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled golden over the streets, the same streets where his journey began, but now they felt different, brighter, filled with possibility. Miguel strummed his guitar, and the children's voices joined his, carrying their song into the city like a promise that dreams, no matter how small they start, can grow loud enough for the whole world to hear.